Right, sorry, I know we're supposed to be recording.
3 cups of coffee, 1 sweetener, chicken, asparagus, McDonald's. Joe, you had a Max?
Oh, I had McDonald's the other day and I had a Big Mac meal. Then I also got the 3 for £3. So I had a Big Mac meal.
Sorry, what's the 3 for £3? So, season 2 of the Powered by People podcast is now live, which obviously means that our hundreds of viewers are going to be treated to season 2 of the After the Mic Drops.
Yep, indeed.
So, for those that are new to our channel, after a podcast will go live, one of our Powered by People podcasts with one of our amazing guests.
Well, who came up with that name?
That's an alliteration in the Powered by People podcast. But after the episode, we will then give a brief synopsis, I guess, of what happened, who the guest was, any key takeaways, and just cover anything that's been going on, right?
And just have a bit of fun while we're there.
Absolutely. So we kicked off this series with the
One and only
Mario. We've obviously known Mario for quite a while. He's been on our hit list for podcast guests, hasn't he, for quite some time.
He was with Bolt, global head of TA at Bolt, but he's now transitioned over to Autodoc, where he's actually, for what we discussed on the podcast, is more of his role at Autodoc. So he's head of people analytics, or talent analytics. We predominantly focused on talent insights and analytics in the podcast, which, to be honest with you, I didn't really know that much about, and I learned a lot on the podcast. There's so much that goes into talent analytics or people analytics. We talked a lot about employee life cycle. At what stage does an employee life cycle actually start? Just from the moment they actually sign the contract? Or is it before that, when they first engage with a brand?
Well, I guess they're not an employee then, are they?
No, but when they become an employee, did their life cycle start earlier than when they actually became an employee?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're calling it the employee life cycle, then it starts when they become an employee, right? But for a lot of brands, obviously, you could be a consumer before you're an employee, right? Or aware of that brand.
But before you're an employee, you're a candidate.
Yep.
And a candidate isn't an employee, but that's part of the, when you're looking at it from a head of a TA's or a TA leadership perspective, you're looking at the candidates that you've got coming through the pipeline, and that sort of life cycle starts, I suppose, from any level of engagement, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's obviously a big thing about candidate experience, right? Like, focus for a lot of people. So, and we were actually having a discussion, weren't we? That we're going to save that discussion for another time.
Woo!
Because that's something that's quite good. But essentially, to give everyone a sneak peek, we're going to do an episode around the fact that talent acquisition, we're not in the acquisition business. We're actually in something else. But we'll save that, and maybe we'll cover that as part of the employee brand EVP.
Yeah, nice.
Episode. Nice. So lots of takeaways from Mario around talent intelligence and the talent insights, which is incredibly important, particularly as people are trying to either grow or sustain teams at the moment.
One thing that Mario brought up, which I really loved, and it's so important to keep this in the back of your mind when you're in such a big role. We deal with lots of different TA leaders on a day-to-day basis, some hiring 10, 20,000 people a year for their organizations. And Mario sort of talked a lot about remembering that every employee, whether they're, going into a VP, senior leadership level, or whether they're, more... just a driver or a cleaner, everyone in the process has got somebody that they're going to go home to and tell the story of, their excitement for this new opportunity that they've landed and this new job that they've got. And so it's so easy for a TA leader to get stuck into the monotony and the got, the numbers of the hiring business, but it's also good to remind yourself that all of those individual numbers are people with their own individual stories. Ties quite nicely into sort of employer branding, I suppose, and how that all sort of feeds into analytics as well. But it was nice to have that reminder, because you can often get a little bit caught up in the numbers, your ratios and your numbers and your stats and your KPIs. But this sort of also came up on a more recent podcast with Kevin Blair, that we should potentially be looking at the value of an employee rather than just the bum on a seat as a number, but the value of that employee and the value that they add to the company. And that sort of ties in with all of that sort of same conversation. So yeah, it's really good to get into that and really get Mario's views and thoughts around it.
Definitely. And that's the interesting point, right? Because I wholeheartedly agree that every person obviously should be treated as a person, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you're dealing with 10, 12, 15,000 hires, it's very hard to do that, right?
Yeah, it is.
Because unfortunately, at that volume scale, it's almost, it is physically impossible to recognise those people individually.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess that's an interesting thing to look at, how you can keep that going from a candidate experience through employee life cycle, despite it being potentially automated or using AI. How can that remain personal and remain relevant?
Yeah.
Feel like people are being treated as individuals and they are valued as an individual.
Yeah, and we cover a lot of that in the podcast. So go check it out, because there's some really good. Mario gave us some really good insights, and not only that sort of life cycle side of things, but also just the talent intelligence side of things. When you're looking at obviously his time at Bolt covered, they're doing massive expansions across Europe and Africa, and when you're moving into new regions, how you scoping that landscape, what does the talent skills or the talent pools look like in terms of the skills that you need in those areas.
Yep.
And so there's some really good stuff in there. So yeah, check it out.
Over and out.
Over and out.